The University of Georgia College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences, in partnership with the professional landscape industry, proudly presents Pruning Ornamental Plants in the Landscape, Part 1, Basic Principles and Techniques of Pruning Ornamental Plants. Pruning is one of the most skilled landscape management practices. When done properly and at the right time, pruning results in healthy, vigorous plants, improved growth form, and optimum beauty in the landscape. When pruning, it is important to know where to make proper cuts and how and when to prune for maximum benefits. This training will discuss the basic principles for successful pruning of shrubs, ornamental grasses, and ground covers. While there is not enough time to discuss the pruning techniques for each species in the landscape, it will provide some pruning guidelines that can be applied to a wide variety of plants. Every pruning cut should be made with an objective in mind. One of the most obvious reasons to prune is to remove dead, diseased, or broken branches. Sometimes pruning is done to remove old foliage from the previous season to make way for new spring growth. Reducing plant size is the most common reason for pruning ornamental shrubs. Some shrubs outgrow their space, cover up windows, or compete with other plants. These plants are pruned to reduce their size and to bring them back into scale with the rest of the landscape. Shrubs that block the visibility of motorists pulling out of driveways or pedestrian traffic along walkways may need to be pruned to prevent these hazards. Timing is very important. Plants are pruned to promote flowering. Some flowering shrubs, like azaleas, are pruned after flowering to remove lanky growth, to produce a more compact growth habit, and to increase the number of side shoots that will produce flowers the following year. Before pruning, make certain you have the right tool for the task and that your tools are clean and sharp. Hand pruners, loppers, and head shears are the basic tools for pruning most shrubs. Power pruners and chainsaws are sometimes used for specific tasks. Before using any hand or power tool, make certain you understand the necessary safety procedures and wear the appropriate protective clothing. To begin our discussion of pruning, let's review the biology of pruning and how plants respond to pruning cuts. Woody shoots have lateral buds at their nodes, where the leaf attaches to the stem, and an apical bud at their tip. As long as the apical bud is intact, it produces a hormone called auxin that moves downward in the stem and prevents lateral buds from growing. When the terminal bud and its auxin supply is removed by pruning, the lateral shoots within 6 to 8 inches of the pruning cut are triggered to grow. When the terminal bud of horizontal shoots is removed, the lateral buds on the upper side of the horizontal branch grow most vigorously. These upright shoots are called water sprouts. These vigorous upright shoots seldom flower or fruit and cause the canopy of the plant to become thick and dense and in need of pruning. When shrubs are sheared, apical dominance is disrupted and lateral shoots closest to the cut are triggered to grow. This results in a thick, dense outer canopy which is not healthy for the plant. Most broadleaf woody plants, such as camellias and hollies, have latent buds deep within their woody stem. Shortly after pruning, these latent buds emerge to produce an abundance of young, vigorous stems just below the cut. Conifers, like pines, junipers, and spruces, do not have latent buds, so when they are cut back to old woody stems, new shoots will not emerge to close the cut. Now that you have a basic understanding of how shrubs respond to pruning cuts and know the importance of pruning with a purpose in mind, let's look at the common techniques used to prune shrubs in the landscape. Ornamental plants with small leaves, such as this dwarf Yupon holly, are sometimes sheared. The technical name for this type of pruning cut is heading. Heading reduces the size of the plant while stimulating vigorous new growth close to the cut. In the case of shearing, it results in thick, dense growth toward the outer surface of the canopy and loss of natural form. The result is a formal, geometric, unnatural appearance. Hedges are sometimes formally pruned with heading cuts. Formally pruned hedges should be pruned in a pyramidal growth form, widest at the bottom and tapering toward the top. This allows sunlight to reach all parts of the canopy so growth remains thick all the way to ground level. For large jobs, power hedgers are often used to make this pruning job most efficient. A second pruning technique is called thinning, the process of removing a branch back to a side branch or bud. Since the most vigorous regrowth occurs close to the cut, thinning thickens the internal canopy and makes the shrub appear more bushy. This shrub is being reduced in size with thinning cuts. It is done by determining which branches need to be reduced in size, then reaching into the canopy and cutting the branch back to a side branch or bud. The result is a smaller shrub with an informal appearance and natural-looking growth form. The art of this pruning technique is to make the internal cut so they are not visible from a distance, and to achieve a pleasing growth form without voids or large holes in the canopy. Now let's see how heading and thinning cuts are put into practice by discussing different pruning situations where these cuts are made. This shrub has obviously become too large for its surroundings and needs to be brought back into scale with the rest of the landscape. Thinning cuts could be made to reduce the size of the shrub, but in this case, the worker and his supervisor, with approval from the property owner, have decided to do a more drastic type of pruning using heading cuts. It is called rejuvenation pruning. Rejuvenation pruning is done by making heading cuts on the main branches and trunk, reducing their size close to ground level. This type of pruning is done in late winter, approximately 4 to 6 weeks before spring growth begins. This pruning is severe and will create a void in the landscape for several weeks until new growth emerges. Most broadleaf ornamental plants will respond to this pruning with new growth from latent buds emerging below the cut. Make certain your supervisor and the property owner approves of this pruning before it is done. The result of rejuvenation pruning is abundant, vigorous new sprouts immediately below the cut. Use your hand to rub off any unwanted sprouts when they are young and succulent. Then, with regular heading and thinning cuts, a smaller, more compact form can be maintained for several years. Ornamental grasses are commonly rejuvenated at the end of winter to remove old foliage and to make way for new foliage. They respond to heading cuts made to within a few inches of ground level. Be sure to wear gloves, long sleeves, and other protective clothing when pruning grasses with razor-sharp leaves. Rejuvenation pruning is often done on liriope in mid to late February before spring growth begins. On level sites, an efficient way of heading back liriope is by setting a push lawnmower in the highest wheel setting possible and mowing over the bed. Do not attempt to rejuvenate conifers like junipers, pines, or spruces. These plants are not capable of forming new growth from wood older than 1 year old. Thinning cuts are often done to direct or change growth form. By making thinning cuts back to buds or branches that are growing upward, a more upright canopy can be achieved. This might be useful on plants growing in small spaces. On the other hand, thinning cuts made to branches or buds growing horizontally directs growth outward and opens up the center of the plant. This shrub has been pruned to direct its shape upward. This shrub has been pruned to achieve an open spreading form. Sometimes it is desirable to change a bushy shrub to a tree form. Crepe myrtle, camellia, wax myrtle, Yupon holly, chase tree, and wax leaf ligustrum are examples of shrubs that are commonly pruned to a single trunk or multi-trunk tree form. This crepe myrtle is 2 to 3 years old and is grown as a bushy shrub. The client wants a multi-trunk tree form. The first step is to choose 3 to 5 vigorously growing branches that are equally spaced and growing in a circle around the center axis of the shrub. Once these future main trunks are selected, prune off all other competing growth. The next step is to remove any low-growing lateral branches from the selected trunks that may interfere with mowing and other maintenance practices. This technique is called limbing up, or lifting the crown or skirt. In addition, several branches growing inward and crossing other branches are removed to open up the canopy. Finally, some thinning cuts back to branches growing outward may be necessary to balance the form of the plant. Like rejuvenation pruning, changing a shrub to a tree form requires several cuts and a great deal of follow-up maintenance. Within a few weeks, an abundance of new shoots will sprout along the main trunks and from the shoots that have been cut to ground level. An efficient way of removing unwanted shoots when they are young and succulent is to wear gloves and rub them off by hand. Hand pruners are used to remove thicker shoots. It's important to prune flowering shrubs at the right time of year. Many spring flowering shrubs like azalea, forsythia, spirea, and oakleaf hydrangea set their blossom buds during the previous growing season. Pruning these plants in winter would be a mistake because it would remove their flower buds. It's best to prune these plants after flowering. Summer flowering shrubs, on the other hand, bloom on new growth of the season, so they can be pruned in winter without affecting their blossom. Examples are roses, vitex, crepe myrtle, butterfly bush, and beautyberry. If you're not certain where to prune a plant, check with your supervisor. Knockout roses are popular flowering shrubs. They are pruned in the early spring, just before their buds begin to swell. First, remove any dead and diseased wood. Cut back canes that show dieback symptoms to healthy wood. Next, prune weak, thin shoots from within the canopy by removing them back to the main stem. The remaining healthy and vigorous stems should be cut back to a lateral branch or bud within 15 to 18 inches of ground level. Finally, since crepe myrtle is one of the most common plants in southern landscapes and is so often mispruned, let's look at how the pruning techniques discussed in the training are put into practice to prune this plant. This is a summary of typical pruning of a crepe myrtle. Remove suckers originating from below ground roots. Thin the canopy by removing crowded or crossing branches. Remove upright growing shoots or water sprouts. The seed heads can be removed, but if left, they will fall off as new growth resumes in the spring. Pruning is a very important skill. Pruning is a highly visible landscape management practice. Proper pruning results in quality landscapes and is living proof of your skill as a landscape professional. In this training, you have learned the importance of pruning with purpose and an objective, whether it is to control size, to shape a better form, to rejuvenate an overgrown shrub, or to enhance flowering. It is also essential to have the appropriate tool or tools for each pruning task. Then, use the pruning technique that best accomplishes your objective. Finally, before pruning flowering shrubs, determine whether the plant blooms on old wood from the previous growing season or if it flowers on new growth, because flowering time dictates pruning time. The result of your effort and attention to detail is a healthy, attractive landscape and a beautiful environment that you and your employer will be proud of.